The judge laughed at him. The lawyers mocked him. Everyone thought he was just a clueless teenager who had wandered into the wrong courtroom. But when this 17-year-old pulled out his attorney's license, the room went silent. By the end of the trial, he would destroy a team of corporate lawyers and leave even the judge begging for his respect. You won't believe how it all unfolded. You don't belong here, boy. This isn't a playground. It's a courtroom. The voice boomed across the silent chamber as Judge Harrison glared down at a young teenager standing nervously by the defense table. The boy, who looked no older than 17, had walked into court that morning carrying nothing but a worn-out backpack and an old notebook. Everyone thought he was just another curious high school student sneaking in to watch a case. The entire room broke into muffled laughter. Some of the lawyers in their expensive suits shook their heads, whispering to each other. A few people in the gallery even pulled out their phones, eager to capture the moment of humiliation. To them, this wasn't serious. It was entertainment. What business could a teenager possibly have inside a courtroom where lives, money, and reputations were on the line? But the boy didn't back away. He stood straighter, his hands gripping the edges of his notebook, his eyes steady despite the mocking stares. There was something different about him, something determined. He wasn't fidgeting or panicking like any ordinary kid would under such pressure. Instead, he looked at Judge Harrison as if this was exactly where he was meant to be. The judge leaned forward, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Well, cat got your tongue? Or are you going to tell me why you've interrupted my courtroom? The boy finally spoke, his voice quiet but clear enough to echo through the hall. I'm not here to interrupt, Your Honor. I'm here to stand for someone who has no one else left. A ripple of surprise moved through the audience. The boy's words carried a weight that didn't match his age. For a brief second, the laughter stopped. Even Judge Harrison raised an eyebrow, caught off guard by the teenager's composure. Still, he wasn't convinced. And just who exactly do you think you are, walking in here like you own the place? The boy opened his backpack and carefully pulled out a folder filled with legal documents, his fingers steady as he placed them on the table. His notebook, scuffed and filled with scribbles, looked like the kind of thing a student would bring to class, but within its pages were notes, laws, and case studies far beyond the level of a normal high schooler. He lifted his chin and looked the judge in the eye. I may look like a kid, he said firmly, but I know why I'm here. And by the time this is over, you'll know too. The silence that followed was deafening. For the first time, the courtroom wasn't laughing. They were waiting. Would this teenager embarrass himself? Or would he prove that appearances aren't always what they seem? One thing was certain. Before the day ended, his name would be on everyone's lips. The case was about a struggling single mother, Mrs. Ramirez, accused of fraud by a large corporation. The company claimed she had forged documents to keep her modest home. Their team of expensive lawyers were ready to crush her. The men in tailored suits whispered confidently among themselves. Certain victory was already in their grasp. To them, this was nothing more than another routine case. One poor woman standing against a giant machine. It wasn't a fight. It was a slaughter waiting to happen. Mrs. Ramirez sat trembling in her seat, completely alone. She clutched a faded purse in her lap, her knuckles white with fear. She had spent weeks praying for a miracle, but as she sat in that courtroom surrounded by polished lawyers and cold stares, her hope was fading fast. Her public defender had quit at the very last minute, dismissing her case as unwinnable. He hadn't even looked her in the eyes when he told her he was walking away. She had no money to hire anyone else. No family who could step in. She was alone, utterly abandoned. That's when the teenager, Daniel, stood up. The shuffle of his chair against the floor made heads turn. A boy, no older than 17, rising in a courtroom filled with experienced attorneys and hardened judges. People thought it was some kind of joke. A few spectators chuckled under their breath, certain the young man was about to humiliate himself. But Daniel's expression wasn't nervous or playful. It was calm, determined, and full of purpose. Your Honor, he said, voice steady but respectful. I'd like to represent Mrs. Ramirez. The entire courtroom gasped. Murmurs spread like wildfire through the room. Judge Harrison's eyebrows shot up so high they nearly disappeared into his hairline. You? Represent her? You're a child. Sit down before you embarrass yourself. His tone was sharp, almost mocking, like he wanted to put Daniel back in his place. But Daniel didn't flinch. He didn't stumble over his words. With respect, sir, he replied, meeting the judge's eyes with surprising confidence. The law doesn't forbid a qualified individual from representing a client, if the client consents. And Mrs. Ramirez has asked me to. The judge smirked, leaning back in his chair, clearly amused. You're telling me you're an attorney? Don't make me laugh. His voice dripped with disbelief, certain this boy was bluffing. Daniel reached into his worn backpack and pulled out a slim wallet. From it, he carefully slid out an official-looking ID card and held it up for all to see. The bailiff took it and handed it to the judge, who studied it with a frown that slowly shifted into something else, shock. The courtroom fell into stunned silence. He wasn't lying. He wasn't joking. He wasn't pretending. Daniel had graduated college at 15. He had completed law school at 16. And now, at just 17 years old, he stood before them as one of the youngest licensed attorneys in the country. Gasps filled the chamber. The smug lawyers who had been laughing moments before exchanged uneasy glances. The reporters in the back of the room scrambled to scribble notes. Even Mrs. Ramirez turned to look at Daniel with wide, tear-filled eyes, her despair slowly being replaced with a flicker of hope. Judge Harrison cleared his throat, gripping the ID card like it might burn his fingers. For the first time that day, the courtroom realized this was no ordinary trial, and Daniel was no ordinary teenager. The corporate lawyers chuckled at first, thinking this boy would be easy to crush. To them, he was nothing more than a child who had wandered into a lion's den. They leaned back in their seats with smug smiles, confident the trial would be over in a matter of minutes. They began by throwing around complicated legal terms, trying to confuse him. They waved giant stacks of documents in the air, making sure the jury could see the sheer volume of evidence they had. They spoke in a tone dripping with arrogance, as if every word Daniel said was laughable. Their strategy was simple: intimidate, overwhelm, and humiliate him until he broke down. But Daniel? He didn't back down. He didn't even flinch. His posture remained straight, his face calm, his eyes sharp and focused. Every time the lawyers tried to speak over him, he waited patiently, then answered with a confidence that left the room unsettled. When the opposing lawyers sneered, "Do you even understand what estoppel means?" the courtroom chuckled, expecting the boy to falter. But Daniel calmly defined it word for word from memory, not only explaining it but also applying it directly to the case at hand. The lawyer's smirk disappeared instantly, his face flushing red as whispers spread through the jury box. It was the first crack in their wall of arrogance. And that was only the beginning. When they tried to bury him in legal paperwork, piling hundreds of pages on the table, Daniel flipped through each document with lightning speed. His eyes scanned the fine print like a machine, his pencil scribbling quick notes in the margins of his notebook. Within minutes, he began pointing out inconsistencies no one else had noticed, not even the judge. "This date here doesn't match the record from last year," he said, holding up a page. The jury leaned closer. Then, without missing a beat, he pulled another document from the stack. "And here, you've submitted the same evidence twice under different labels." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The corporate lawyers shifted uncomfortably, whispering frantically to each other. One by one, their carefully constructed arguments began to crumble, piece by piece, under Daniel's relentless precision. The jury leaned forward in their seats, no longer bored, but captivated by the boy genius dismantling a team of seasoned attorneys. Even the courtroom reporters, who had initially rolled their eyes at the thought of covering a kid lawyer, now typed furiously, knowing they were witnessing something extraordinary. And there, at the center of it all, sat Mrs. Ramirez. Just hours earlier, she had been moments away from losing everything: her home, her dignity, her future. Now, tears rolled down her cheeks, but they weren't tears of fear. They were tears of hope. For the first time in months, she believed she might actually win. And it was all because of a boy no one had taken seriously. Until now. As the trial went on, Judge Harrison kept watching Daniel closely. At first, he had mocked him, dismissing him as a foolish kid playing dress-up in a place he didn't belong. But as the hours passed, his perception began to shift. Every objection Daniel raised was precise, every counterargument razor-sharp. There was no nervous fumbling, no hesitation in his voice. Instead, there was confidence, intelligence, and above all, a burning passion for justice that seemed to radiate from him. The judge, who had seen countless lawyers over the years, found himself leaning forward, listening with the same curiosity as the jury. This boy wasn't ordinary. He was extraordinary. Finally, after hours of back and forth, the room settled. The corporate lawyers, once smug and arrogant, now looked deflated, their papers scattered in disarray. Mrs. Ramirez clasped her hands together tightly, her heart racing. And then Daniel stood. The courtroom fell silent as he walked to the center, notebook in hand. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't try to impress with big legal words. Instead, he spoke with simple truth, the kind that cut straight to the heart. Mrs. Ramirez isn't a criminal, he began, his tone steady yet filled with conviction. She's a hardworking mother who was targeted because this company thought she was too poor to fight back. They expected her to stay silent. They expected her to give up. But today, she had the courage to stand up, and I had the honor of standing with her. Justice isn't about power. It's about truth. And the truth is, she did nothing wrong. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. For a moment, no one breathed. Even the jury, who had sat through countless trials, looked visibly moved. Some exchanged glances, their expressions softening. A woman in the gallery dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. The reporters had stopped typing, captivated by the raw sincerity in Daniel's voice. Judge Harrison cleared his throat, but his usual commanding tone was gone. His voice was softer now, almost respectful. "I underestimated you, Mr. Daniel," he admitted, his eyes lingering on the boy who had just shaken the foundations of his courtroom. "I mocked you before even giving you a chance. But what I witnessed today was nothing short of remarkable." The tension grew as the jury filed out to deliberate. Minutes felt like hours. Mrs. Ramirez's hands trembled as she whispered prayers under her breath, while Daniel sat quietly, his face calm, but his heart pounding. Finally, the jury returned. The foreman stood, paper in hand, and spoke the words that changed everything: "Not guilty." A gasp of relief echoed through the room. Mrs. Ramirez burst into tears, covering her face with her hands. She was free. After months of fear, humiliation, and despair, she had won. And she had won because a boy everyone had dismissed as a child had stood up and fought for her when no one else would. The courtroom erupted in murmurs of awe, and all eyes turned to Daniel, the teenager who had just defeated giants. As the courtroom erupted in cheers, Mrs. Ramirez rushed to Daniel, throwing her arms around him with tears streaming down her face. Her body shook with relief, and her words came out as little more than a broken whisper. "You saved my life," she said, clinging to him as if afraid he might disappear. For her, this victory wasn't just about keeping her home. It was about dignity, about proving that she wasn't powerless, and that justice could still exist in a world stacked against the poor. Daniel patted her back gently, his calm expression softening into the warmest of smiles. News spread like wildfire. By the next morning, television stations, online articles, and social media platforms were flooded with the same story. Headlines blared across the country. Teen attorney defeats corporate giants in courtroom drama. Clips of the young lawyer dismantling seasoned professionals were replayed on news shows, inspiring viewers everywhere. People were fascinated not just by his brilliance, but by his bravery, his refusal to let age, status, or power silence him. Overnight, Daniel became a symbol of hope, proof that anyone, no matter their background, could make a difference if they stood for what was right. Even Judge Harrison, a man not easily impressed, stepped down from the bench after the trial and extended his hand. His eyes, once filled with disdain, now carried humility and respect. "I owe you an apology," he admitted, his voice quieter than usual. and I owe you my respect. You've reminded me why I became a judge in the first place. Somewhere along the way, I forgot that justice isn't about winning or losing. It's about truth. And today, you reminded all of us of that truth. The room went still for a moment as everyone watched the older man shake hands with the teenager he had once ridiculed. Daniel's reply was simple but powerful. He smiled and said, "It's not about age, Your Honor. It's about believing in justice." His words echoed through the courtroom like a lesson carved into stone. And with that, the boy who once walked into the courtroom mocked as a child walked out celebrated as a hero. Reporters followed him, cameras flashed, and strangers stopped to applaud him as he exited the courthouse doors. He was still just 17, still carrying the same worn-out backpack and notebook, but now the world saw him differently. A teenager, yes, but also a brilliant attorney, determined to keep fighting for those who had no voice, those society often overlooked. Because sometimes the most unexpected heroes come in the smallest packages. And sometimes the one you laugh at today becomes the one who changes everything tomorrow. For Mrs. Ramirez, that change meant freedom and hope. For the courtroom, it meant a lesson in humility. And for Daniel, it was only the beginning of a legacy that would inspire countless others to stand up for what's right, no matter how impossible it seemed. If you found this story inspiring, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss another powerful video. Thanks for watching.